Welcome, Dr. James Beckett, Sports Card Insights, the second part of my Dueling Questions with Iowa Dave Schwartz. And thanks sponsors, Beckett Media, Beckett Grading, Beckett Authentication, ComC.com, Burbank Sports Cards, Mike Stadium Sports Cards, Heritage Auctions, Huggins and Scott Auctions, Topps, Upper Deck, and Panini. I asked Dave any feedback about my episodes, and he said, I don't like it when you have multi-part episodes. So my apologies, Dave. But instead of making 3 parts, because we talked for over an hour, and I thought it's good stuff, my listeners will want to hear it. But in deference to Dave, this is a couple of slightly longer parts, and that's it. So I didn't go to a 3rd part, Dave, but I hate to cut too aggressively because I don't want to leave good stuff on the cutting floor. So here it is.
Sometimes I like to go back and listen to sports card content from 5, 6, 7, 10 years ago. Like many, I had a big gap in my hobby experience. It helps me fill in the holes. I recently listened to one from 2019 in which a very well-known dealer, I'm not going to say his name, but he talked about setting up a deal to buy someone's collection of 1961 Fleer basketball. And the seller told him he had something like 5 Chamberlains and 6 Wests and 5 Elgin Baylors and so on and so forth. It turns out that what he really had was several unopened, preserved full boxes of 61 Fleer. And the guy was just trying to do the odds, thinking that's how many that he had. He was just trying to estimate. So during the interview, the dealer chuckled because the boxes were worth way more unopened than those cards were. But the seller didn't know that, so the dealer got this incredible haul of unopened 61 Fleer boxes, which he then sold at a massive profit. So my question is, what obligations do you think dealers have to sellers when that situation arises? Is it just seller beware, or every person for themselves? Or do dealers have some sort of an ethical obligation?
They absolutely have an ethical obligation to not lie. So I think that's first. Depending on the platform and the way the seller or the owner represents himself or herself, I've been in situations where the seller tries to bully the buyer into a price without any negotiation. But I've also seen situations where the buyer ridiculously lowballs the seller. Since then, increasingly, dealers have brought consignment into it. Say, look, this is a big deal. You've got some great value here. I will be your agent. I will take X%, and I will find a good auctioneer to maximize or optimize your value. If you want to sell it to me right now, based on the cash and liquidity and all that I have, my offer is X thousand dollars. But you'll get a lot more if you're willing to take more time. I'm not telling any lies, but if you lay out the options for the person, sometimes they'll say, hey, a bird in the hand, I'll take it. But I don't think you have an obligation to fully educate the person. And nowadays, more and more, as you said, there's podcasts out there and authorities. My friends contact me. And like I said, I've said on the podcast, I'm a pro bono consultant. They asked me, I said, show me some pictures and I'll make introduction to them for an auction house, and they're well treated. But that's tricky, Dave. It happened a lot more in the old days than it does now, I hope.
Yeah, it reminded me of listening to an interview about a year ago with Pat Quinn, in which he was going down to Venezuela and started bringing back what is now the robust Venezuelan cards. And I had the same tingle then, listening to him talk. They would go down and just load up suitcases full of these cards back and just pay pennies on the dollar for what they knew they would get. But at the same time, the money that the people were getting down there for the cards was also helpful to the Venezuelan citizens. And it just makes me think, how far does the obligation go? You can't hold the seller's hand all the way and say, no, now let me give you a 3-week course on 61 Fleer basketball or whatever else.
I'm very familiar with the Venezuelan thing. Good friends with Pat Quinn, known him for 50 years, whatever it's been. And when he was doing that, there were other buddies that he had that did that. There were a lot of expenses that went into going down there and setting up. He had a local agent I was aware of. There was a Venezuelan national that was related in a way through Chicago where he was. And he had buddies, so they had substantial expenses. The first time they went down there, they had no idea where they were going to get a whole bunch of stuff or come back empty-handed. What it's like, I'm not a big fan of the drug companies, but drug companies charge a lot for certain drugs, not because of what it costs to produce them, but because they're trying to make up for the other drugs that didn't make out, or they want to get their R&D investment back. Pat absolutely was an opportunist. He had his own auction. He's been a pioneer in the industry, but he absolutely was looking for the best deal. I will say this, he never went down there with a loaded pistol and said, you have to sell me these cards. In fact, in Venezuela and some of those countries, he may have had a pistol pulled on him. I don't know. You're really in a foreign country there. So there was some risk to it. And I think when you have a lot of risk, it drives down your asking price. And again, they didn't have to say yes, but who else is coming? I think I'll hold on to these. They're going to be worth more someday. He was the only guy looking for them. And this has been decades ago. Some of that was before PSA and BGS and SGC. They were pasted in albums and they were paper thin. And if you find a 5, it's a fabulous card in most of those. Really, he and his cohorts there were ultra advanced collectors. Yes, there was a profit motive, but there was the addiction also of wanting to have the best collection, wanting to get the cards that nobody else has. So I'm very familiar with that. It's like when they're making sneakers in Asia, they're paying low wages, but it's probably higher wages than they can get in other industries in Southeast Asia. Doesn't make it right, but I don't think he committed any felonies. They were arm's length transactions. He had to pay his go-between, and he didn't steal any cards. He said, here's my offer. I'm in town today. When I got started in the early 70s, I was in grad school, and it seems so many of my dealer friends, the guys who were making the circuit, all the shows, and there was just one major show in each city. So you got to know the guys pretty well over the course of years. Many of them were teachers, as you and I have history with that. College, high school, whatever. PE teachers, lots of teachers, but more than that, they were pretty smart people that either liked numbers or reading or history. It wasn't a casual hobby to make money. It was a learning experience, an enjoyment of the game. So having a good memory, being able to remember prices or remember scarcities. I think it's less so now, but those were simpler days. But to me, that made it more fun for me. When I'm talking to people at the show, they were students of the game, students of the hobby. Do you think we've lost that?
Good question. I don't think so, but I don't think it's as visible. I'm a professor of media and communication. We are bombarded with so many more messages daily, hourly, by the minute than we used to be. And those that are the most vocal, that are getting the most likes, the most attention, rise to the top. Everything else gets pushed down. I did a podcast in which I talked about reading books on the history of the sports card hobby. Surprisingly, I received more comments on that than I had in some time, in which people said, hey, what were those books again? Send me a link. So I think there is an appetite for it, but I don't think it happens at the beginning. At the beginning, you have all these flashing lights and buzzers around you, and you're just grabbing things you think you should grab, or you're grabbing things that are nostalgic. But when you commit to it, that I think is when the curiosity starts. And you want to learn just a little bit more and a little bit more. For example, I'm going back and listening to podcasts and watching YouTube content from 2015, 2016. Oh, that's what that meant back then. Now I understand what people are talking about now. So I think the appetite is there. I don't think we hear about it as much. I don't think it's as plentiful as it was. The world just moves a lot quicker. When I do my lessons now in the classroom, when I was in grad school, I was trained to keep my lessons to about 12 minutes or less. Now we can stay on the same topic over the course of a 75-minute class session, but I can't stay on any one task for more than 12 minutes because people start to lose interest and they cannot focus. Maybe that's tied to it. Maybe that's the same thing. Is people want to know the history. They want to understand the institutional knowledge that comes with people who have been in the hobby for longer. But I think they just seek it out a little bit different. It might be a quick Google search. It might be searching ChatGPT. and they get their answer, which may or may not be accurate, but the yearning is still there. But it just has to be packaged differently and consumed.
I think the key word that you said is nostalgia. If there's a sense of nostalgia, yes, they're going to look for a book. If it's not nostalgic to them, if it's just what's the latest product, they're not looking for a book for that. They're looking for what's the buzz on social media. Back in the old days, these dealers out there making the circuit were also collectors, were also teachers in many cases and students of the game, but it was mainly about vintage. They weren't bringing this year's sets. It was the older, the better. And for that, some of these books really are enjoyable. And the ones you mentioned and what I'm sure people brought up, I've tried to read them all, but there's some great books that frankly were done by legitimate journalists in many cases. Pete Williams, some other people that had writing credentials and sat down and wrote serious books. But I just think much of the hobby now is not interested in that. They're interested in the ultra modern stuff, and you can't write a book about it. You want to watch on YouTube or Instagram, just see what's going on. Doesn't mean they still don't need to be smart to be in this hobby.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a benefit to be smart. And if you're smart, you'll know that breaking is not the way to make money in this hobby unless you're a breaker.
You mentioned the term, the hobby, capital T, capital H. When we say the hobby, I wonder if there are two hobbies that are occupying the same ecosystem. There are collectors and dealers and sellers and buyers, but I almost feel like flipping is a separate hobby that's taking place within the hobby, but it's something different. The trade up challenge for kids, right? Or I've got 9 Jalen Hurts rookies, and what can I do with them? If you're successful with it, there are a large group of people who say, look at that person, they were successful with it. I don't want to use the word deserves, but who can reside under this term, the hobby? Has the term expanded, or is there a parasite inside of it?
A hobby to me implies enjoyment, and industry implies financial considerations. When I've done episodes trying to draw a line, I get mostly feedback that says a lot of people are both. They're hobbyists and they see this as an industry. They'd like to make money, but they love cards. Does it move from a hobby to an industry for some people, or move from an industry that's dispassionate to an emotional, enjoyable hobby with your best friends? I hope it's fluid, because that's part of the dynamic element of it. You can hobby whatever way you want to do it. Your lane might be to flip. But again, that's tapping into something that's very enjoyable. I won't say it's addictive, but it gives you psychological benefits. You get endorphins or whatever. It's a kick to be able to buy something. There are kids that go to the show, they buy something for $100 and they sell it an hour later for 150. What happened to buying it for $100 and putting it in your collection? No, their collection is not a collection, but that doesn't mean they're not a hobbyist. Their hobby is flipping. I don't know if that's what you're saying.
Oh, in fact, I'm talking about two different hobbies. So yes, the quick flip is a hobby, but is that part of the hobby, as the term denotes for?
Where I say this is the greatest hobby in the world, it's intended to be inclusive. That anybody that shows up at the major card shows is a hobbyist of sorts. And I'm hoping that we can get them to really enjoy the hobby such that they don't see it just as an industry. Industry is very cold. Hobby's very warm. I want a warm hobby experience when I go. I want to be with my friends for the weekend. We don't all chase the same cards, but to me, it's the greatest hobby in the world. Because in breaking, it's not that it's not in the hobby, but breaking is a recipe for losing money. If you're mainly a breakee and you're spending money on breaks, that still could be a hobby like golf. I haven't made any money on golf. Golf cost me money. I like to go to the movies. I haven't even made any money going to the movies. It cost me. I like to go to nice restaurants. I haven't made any money going to the restaurants. It cost me. Okay. I still do it, but I don't call it that I'm not in that industry. So if you're in an industry and if you're breaking, you better be the breaker or you have a bad business model.
With golf and with movies, though, it's an exchange of services. You exchange money for enjoyment. You exchange services for entertainment. And as we've been talking about with our breaking conversation so far, I think the expectations are different. You're trying to get back more money, even though you're not going to. You're going to lose.
Well, if you thought that the breaking was all enjoyment and anything else was gravy, If it's a $20 break, that's equivalent to going to a movie and popcorn. But you're in a situation where if they thought it was all enjoyment and being with my buddies, and it doesn't matter if I get anything, then you can't lose. Okay. Then you're not spending your family's money on things, recipes for problems. Regardless, Dave, whether you're under 18 or not, there's some big kids out there that are in their 50s and 60s who are getting in a lot of trouble.
When I was a kid, my parents would get me your Beckett books for my birthday and Christmas and Hanukkah and whatever else. As a teen, and I started mowing lawns for money, and I would umpire church league baseball games for money. One of the first things I bought was a subscription to your baseball card magazine. Earlier this year, I canceled my PSA subscription. But when I read your magazines, I felt like I was reading journalism about sports cards. I canceled my PSA subscription in January for two reasons. One, because I only grade 2 or 3 cards a year and it wasn't worth it. But two, PSA's magazine, to me, just my opinion, felt more like PR and marketing and less like journalism. So my question is, when you ran Beckett, what was your company's philosophy toward the magazine content?
I won't say it was an afterthought, but the editorial was wrapped around a price guide. My concept, this is a monthly price guide, but in order to deliver it in a pleasing way and make it be something that's socially more acceptable, if it's sitting on the counter, it's not looking like a newsprint thing, even though there was some newsprint in the middle. We were going to put a very nice cover on it that had art from some of the top photographers in the country. Then we were going to have articles, some of which we wrote and some of which were hired out, freelance by staff writers and writers in the various baseball cities for baseball, and legitimate articles, hopefully that had some sports card insights that would help you be a better collector. I get a chuckle when people come up and say, I bought your magazine for the articles.
I did.
And the price guide, but some people did. Or I bought it for the cover art because I just thought it looked really nice. What I wanted to do is create something where I just wanted them to buy it, but it had to have an accurate price guide that showed what was really going on. It had to have other readers write, for example, back in the day, which I was extremely involved in the beginning of that. I did that for as long as I could until I had to delegate it out. But the articles and all that stuff, that was fun. And the key was that I, myself, as well as the people that I hired, we were the quintessential customers. We were the customers. We were doing what we would have wanted, what we did want, because we were the target market. We were collectors and former dealers that had insights about what was going on. So it was easy to figure out, how do you know if people are going to like that? We like it. If we like it, they'll like it. And in most cases, that was true. Generally very positive tone, generally superstar orientation. We weren't breaking hit journalism, smear pieces. It was monthly journalism about sports and sports cards. And we got lots of reader surveys and feedback of what they liked, what they didn't like. And we had people at West Coast, East Coast, Midwest. Every weekend, we had our staff on location at the big shows rotationally. And we had a phone bank of a couple dozen customer service reps that were weekly talking to the 20,000 card shops out there. If they said, hey, we want Bo Jackson on the cover, we might say he was already on the cover 2 months ago. You have to wait a little while, but he's hot right now. It's 1989 or 90 or whatever. So we were trying to be responsive, Dave, and there were bigger regional differences back in those days as well.
You hit something really important there, talking about who was part of your company and the content that you wanted to see. The number one thing that I tell my students is, they say, who should I work for? What content should I make? And I say, make the sort of content that you would want to watch, read, consume. I had a guest speaker once in one of my classes. He was a blogger. That's how long ago this was. He was a baseball blogger for Yahoo Sports. For years, he would bounce around and get hired by a different news organization and would work for them. And he finally thought he just wants to be in Chicago, which is where he's from. And he ended up just blogging about Chicago baseball because that's what he liked and that's what he cared about. And sure enough, soon enough, he started getting subscribers, and then it started growing exponentially. Then he got a book deal, and now here it is 10, 15 years later, and he's made his career on producing the sort of content he wanted to consume. And I think people can sense that genuineness.
Not just sense it. The first 5 years or so, I did most of the substantive hobby type hires. I'd be at the shows so I could interview somebody from Baltimore when I was in that area, or San Francisco or Toronto. And so I'd meet these guys face to face. And when we'd bring them down here for an interview, our guys would say, do we want to have lunch with this guy? Do we want to banter back and forth with this person? Does this person get it? And we didn't make too many mistakes. And many of those people, Dave, frankly, are lifers. They're still in the industry. They work at Upper Deck, at Tops, at Panini, and I'm proud of them. If I was still at Beckett, I would hope they would be still working there, but I'm not. And they have a right to self-determine what's best for their family, but they're doing great because they love the hobby and they care. In fact, they almost care too much, Dave. They're so lifers. They regard this hobby as a sacred trust. That's the kind of guys I want working for me. And we had a few women in the price guide area, but it was mostly guys.